You think you've seen betrayal? Try watching your own daughter fall for the same kind of snake twice. The first one bled her dry and disappeared, left her broken. And now, this new guy, Thomas, smiles like a Sunday preacher, shakes my hand like family, but behind those eyes, greed. I saw it the night he thought nobody was watching, when he slipped into Sarah's study, rifling through her papers like a thief in the dark. And when I confronted him with nothing but a look, he smirked. A smirk, like I was too old, too weak, too washed up to stop him. That was the moment it hit me. This wasn't just about Sarah's money or her heart. It was about my family's future. And he had no idea the storm I was about to bring down on his head. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. I remember the chill in the air that night, the way the streetlights outside flickered on and off like the world itself was warning me. My granddaughter, Anna, had already whispered about overhearing strange late-night calls, hushed tones with names she didn't recognize. She's only 9, but sharper than most adults I know. When she told me about it, I brushed it off at first. God forgive me. I didn't want to believe Sarah could be walking into another disaster. But the bruises on her wrist, faint shadows she tried to cover with makeup, told me more than her words ever would. I tried to reach her, to tell her what I saw, but every sentence bounced back like I was talking to a locked door. She looked at me the way she did years ago when I warned her about Carter, the thief who ran off with 20 grand of her hard-earned savings. She still blames me for not stopping that. And maybe she's right. But this time, I swore I wouldn't let it happen again. So when Thomas leaned close at dinner one evening, his breath hot with bourbon, and muttered, "Stay out of my way, old man, or accidents happen," I didn't flinch. I smiled right back. Because he had no clue, I'd already started laying the traps. And that's when the game began. I woke up the next morning with that threat echoing in my head like a bad country song stuck on repeat. Accidents happen. He wanted me rattled, wanted me to second-guess myself. But at 63 years old, I've lived through Vietnam protests, market crashes, and bearing the love of my life. A slick-talking con man wasn't going to shake me. Still, I knew I had to tread carefully. Sarah was blind in love, and if I pushed too hard, she'd cut me off from Anna, and that little girl was the only ally I had left. Anna came to me later that day, her eyes wide, whispering like we were in some spy movie. She pulled a crumpled piece of notebook paper from her jacket. Numbers, names, arrows, childish handwriting trying to capture something far too dark for her age. "Grandpa," she said, "he was talking to someone named Ava and Connor. They're planning something. I heard him say transfer and Argentina." She looked up at me, waiting for me to tell her it was just her imagination. But it wasn't. That piece of paper felt heavier than any weapon. Proof, tiny, fragile proof, that my gut wasn't lying. But how could I use it without blowing Anna's cover? She was a child, not a soldier. I couldn't let her shoulder this weight alone. That night, I sat in my recliner, staring at the empty spot on the couch where my late wife used to sit. I heard her voice in my memory, warning me about Carter years ago, telling me, "Don't let Sarah rush into something blind." I failed her once, and failure has a long memory. So I started my notebook, a plain leather-bound journal, nothing fancy. Every move Thomas made, every phone call Anna overheard, every glass of wine he poured too heavy. I wrote it down. Brick by brick, I was building my case. And then came the first real sign of danger, a text buzzing on my phone at midnight. "Stop digging, old man. Last warning." I looked at that screen, felt my pulse steady, not quicken, because what Thomas didn't know was that he'd just confirmed everything I needed. Sarah found me in the kitchen the next morning, scribbling in my notebook like some paranoid detective from a late-night TV rerun. She slammed her coffee mug down hard enough to crack the handle. "Dad, I can't do this again. You tried to ruin my first marriage with your suspicions, and now you're trying to destroy this one too." Her voice shook, not with doubt, but with anger. I slid Anna's crumpled paper across the counter, careful, deliberate. "Look at this, Sarah. He's not who you think he is." But she didn't even glance at it. She pushed it back like it was poison. "You're jealous. You can't stand that someone else makes me happy. And just like that, my daughter, my only daughter, chose him over me. The sound of footsteps behind us broke the tension. Thomas strolled in tie loose, shirt unbuttoned just enough to look casual. He wrapped an arm around Sarah's waist and shot me a glance sharp as a knife. Then he leaned close to her ear, but his eyes stayed locked on mine. Don't worry, sweetheart. Some people just can't let go of the past. I wanted to shout, to drag Sarah outside and beg her to see the truth, but instead I stayed silent. Because right there, in that smug little smile, I saw my opening. Later that evening, as I folded laundry in the quiet of my room, my phone buzzed again. This time, no words, just a picture message. My car, parked outside, its windshield cracked clean down the middle. No explanation, no signature, just a warning shot. I sat there in the dark, holding the phone, listening to the hum of the refrigerator down the hall. And I realized something. Thomas wasn't just trying to scare me. He was testing how far I'd go. And that meant he had no idea how far I'd already decided to go. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house felt like a footstep. Every shadow on the wall like someone watching. At 63, insomnia hits different. You don't just lose sleep, you lose strength. But fear wasn't what kept me awake. It was calculation. I walked into garage, turned on the dim overhead light, and pulled out a battered shoebox from the shelf. Inside were old photos, receipts, and a yellowing wedding invitation from Sarah's first marriage to Carter. My wife, God rest her soul, had warned me that day. I remembered her whisper in the church pew. He's smiling too wide. That boy's here for money, not love. I ignored her. Weeks later, Carter vanished with Sarah's savings, leaving her hollow-eyed and humiliated. That memory burned hotter than any bourbon in my cabinet. I promised myself I wouldn't watch history repeat. Not with Thomas. Not with that grin that said he'd already won. The next morning, Anna caught me staring out the window, my notebook open on the table. She slid into the chair beside me, her little hand brushing mine. "Grandpa," she whispered, "I took pictures." She opened her tablet and showed me grainy photos. Thomas's briefcase, folders half open, pages stamped with legal headers. The girl had risked everything sneaking those shots. My heart pounded with equal parts pride and terror. "You're braver than most grown men I know," I told her, voice breaking. But inside, I knew this had gone too far. She was a child. I should have been protecting her from this darkness, not letting her dive into it. Still, the evidence was real, hard, undeniable, and it meant I had to make my next move carefully. That evening, when Sarah caught me and Anna whispering, she snapped. "Enough, Dad. If you keep poisoning Anna against Thomas, I'll make sure you never see her again." Her words cut deeper than any threat Thomas had made. But as I stood there, watching my daughter defend the man who was about to destroy her, one thought sharpened like glass in my chest. If she wouldn't listen now, then I'd have to make her see the truth later, no matter the cost. I bought a cheap digital recorder at the corner drugstore like a man buying cough drops. Quiet, unremarkable, because the last thing a con wants is spectacle. I tucked it into the pocket of my jacket the way my dad used to tuck a handkerchief into his breast. Practical, invisible, stubborn. At home, I practiced pressing the little red button until it felt like muscle memory. Record. Hold. Don't let him slip away. That week I started showing up where Thomas liked to pretend he wasn't. Coffee shop on Elm, the hardware store, the church basement after choir practice. He swaggered around like he owned the town, laughing too loud at his own jokes, offering advice to neighbors who didn't ask for it. I listened, took notes, folded them into my leather notebook like they were pieces of a map. Anna kept sneaking around, too. Once she came back from Thomas's office with the sleeve of his jacket smelling of cigar smoke and a glossy business card for an offshore trustee firm. The name on the card made my stomach drop. Argentina. I tried to corner Thomas the Saturday before the wedding. I met him at the hardware store aisle where the paint swatches hang, smiled, and said nothing about the card. He offered me small talk and a put-down disguise as a compliment. "You're not the man you used to be, Evan. Let the young handle their business." He reached out to pat my shoulder, too close. I felt his fingers like a probe. I walked away, recorder warm in my pocket, heartbeat steady. I was ready to catch him slipping. That night Anna came running into the kitchen, cheeks flushed, whispering like we'd been caught in a thunderstorm. "Grandpa," he was on the phone. He said, "Transfer the accounts." And then he laughed and said, "The old man will make it look like an accident on the road." My hand tightened around the recorder like a fist around a promise. The wedding drew closer with every tick of the clock, and the air in the house grew heavy, like a storm pressing down on the walls. Sarah's excitement was blinding her, and Thomas made sure of it. He bought her flowers, whispered sweet rehearsed lines, paraded her through town like she was already his trophy. But I'd seen trophies before. They always end up collecting dust once the game is over. I doubled down on my own game. At dinner, I casually asked Thomas about Argentina. The fork froze halfway to his mouth. Just for a second. A second was all I needed. His eyes flicked to Sarah, then back to me. Smooth grin plastered on his face. "Argentina? Never been. I'm more of a Paris man, Evan. Maybe you're the one daydreaming." He laughed, and Sarah laughed with him. But I wasn't listening to the laughter. I was watching the sweat bead at his temple. That night, Anna crept into my study with a photo she'd snapped of Thomas's portfolio, documents tucked neatly inside. The words IRS and transfer agreement were clear even through the blur of her shaky hand. My pulse hammered. He wasn't just planning to rob Sarah. He was setting her up to take the fall. The next morning, Sarah cornered me. "Dad, enough. If you can't support me, maybe you shouldn't be at the wedding at all." Her voice cracked, but she stood firm, like a soldier defending the wrong flag. Behind her, Thomas leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, eyes glinting with quiet victory. I didn't answer her. Instead, I closed my notebook, slid it into my jacket, and walked out. Because in that moment I knew I wouldn't stop the wedding by begging her to see the truth. I'd stop it by making sure everyone else did. New Year's Eve, the wedding day. The streets outside glittered with string lights, champagne corks already popping in the distance. But inside me, there was no celebration, only resolve. I buttoned my old gray suit, slid the recorder into the breast pocket, and checked my leather notebook one last time. Evidence, dates, numbers, enough to hang Thomas in the court of public opinion, if not in a real one. At the church hall, everything smelled of roses and wine. Sarah floated across the room in her gown, radiant, blind to the storm about to break. Guests laughed, clinking glasses, while Thomas worked the crowd like a politician on election day. Firm handshakes, easy smiles, hollow charm. Anna tugged my sleeve, her little eyes darting. "Grandpa, come quick." She led me toward the back hallway, where the laughter faded into muffled echoes. She pressed her ear against the restroom door, then looked up at me with fear and certainty. "He's in there with Connor." I flipped on the recorder before I even pushed the door open a crack. Voices spilled out. "Connor, she'll sign the papers before midnight. Once the assets move, IRS will crush her. You'll be long gone. Thomas, and the old man will make it look like a road accident. Same way we handled Patricia in Dallas. Clean, quiet." My breath caught, but my hand stayed steady. Every vile word burned into the device in my pocket, sealing their fate. Anna's fingers squeezed mine. "Grandpa, what do we do now?" I looked at her, then back at the glowing exit sign above the hallway, and I knew we were going to turn their own stage into their execution ground. We had one shot, one raw, ugly, undeniable shot, and I planned to make it count. Anna and I moved like a two-man crew in a heist movie. She was my lookout and distraction. I was a guy with the only piece of real evidence. She flitted around the reception like a firefly, tugging at Annie's sleeves, pointing out the dessert table, whispering urgent secrets to bridesmaids until they giggled and followed her away. It was beautiful and awful to watch, a 9-year-old turning wedding joy into a stage for truth. I slipped into the DJ booth with the recorder warm in my jacket pocket. The DJ, a kid with a snapback and attitude, barely glanced up and I asked for a special request. He snorted, hands on the mixer, but I smiled, paid cash, and told him I wanted a particular song as a lead-in. No one questions an old man asking for Sinatra. I tapped the little red button on the recorder, felt the tiny vibration, and held my breath. The hall below swelled with auld lang syne rehearsals and champagne chatter. I cued the file on my phone, checked levels, and the sound tech waved me on. The cable was live. Then the first thing happened. From somewhere to the rafters, the chandeliers flickered once, twice, then surrendered. The music hiccuped and died. A ripple of startled gasps rose like a wave. Someone screamed for a flashlight. The DJ cursed. I kept my hand on the recorder, every muscle strung tight. And then the second thing happened. A heavy presence at my back, close enough that I could smell bourbon and aftershave. A voice, low, almost sweet. "Evan," it said. "Thought I told you to stay out of my business." My thumb hovered over the red button. The hall was a black ocean. And somewhere below, Sarah's laugh echoed like a bell, right before the darkness swallowed a whole. The blackout lasted no more than 20 seconds, but it felt like a lifetime. When the lights blinked back on, the whole hall gasped in unison, heads whipping toward the DJ booth. I stood there, my hand inches from the sound system, heart hammering like a drum solo. And behind me, Thomas. His smile was gone now, replaced with something raw and sharp. He leaned in so close only I could hear. "One more step, old man, and I swear you'll regret it." His voice dripped poison, but the room's sudden silence pressed against us like a witness. For a moment, I thought he might strike me right there, but then Sarah peered at his side, worry in her eyes, and he straightened up, mask sliding back into place. I forced myself to step away, pretending to fiddle with my jacket. Inside, the recorder hummed with the weight of his confession, every word captured like nails in his coffin. I knew then it wasn't about catching him alone anymore. It was about putting him on trial in front of everyone who mattered. The reception carried on, laughter forced now, but I stayed in the shadows, waiting. Anna found me near the coat racks, clutching her tablet tight. "Grandpa, it's time, isn't it?" Her voice shook, but her eyes were steady, braver than any soldier I'd ever known. I crouched down, whispered, "Not yet. One last move. When it happens, stay close to me." Because the next step wasn't about whispers in hallways or shadows in restrooms. The next step was about turning a celebration into a reckoning. And Thomas had no idea the spotlight he craved was about to burn him alive. The band struck up a jazz number, couples swirling across the dance floor, sequins and satin flashing under chandeliers. I stood at the edge, watching Thomas glide with Sarah, his hand pressed a little too firmly against her back, steering her like she was property. Every smile he gave her was rehearsed. Every kiss on her cheek was a performance. And the crowd, they ate it up. That's when I realized if I wanted this to hit, it had to hit big, not just whispers of suspicion, not just a recording slipped into a detective's inbox. No, this had to be public, messy, unforgettable. Something Sarah couldn't deny and Thomas couldn't wiggle out of. I signaled Anna. She slipped behind the DJ booth like we'd rehearsed, nimble and unnoticed in the chaos of the dance floor. I followed, my notebook tucked under my arm, recorder gripped tight in my hand. My pulse steadied, the way it used to before a big pitch meeting or before I walked down the aisle myself all those years ago. This was no different, just higher stakes. Then, as the song ended and the applause filled the hall, Thomas raised his glass. "To my beautiful bride," he declared, voice booming, "and to the new life we're about to begin." The crowd cheered, glasses clinking like thunder. I felt Anna's small hand squeeze mine, a silent countdown. 3, 2, 1. I handed the DJ my phone, my voice low, commanding, "Play this, now." The room hushed as the speakers crackled. And then through the sound system, Thomas's own voice filled the hall, cold and clear. "The old man will make it look like a road accident. Same way we handled Patricia, in Dallas." Every glass froze midair. Every smile dropped. And Thomas, well, his face told the story better than any words ever could. The silence that followed was deafening. You could hear the clink of a single fork dropped against porcelain, the shuffle of shoes as guests froze mid-step. Then came the murmurs, sharp, panicked, disbelieving, head swiveled toward Thomas, toward Sarah, toward me. Thomas's face drained of color before snapping back to a performance smile. "Some kind of joke," he barked, forcing a laugh that sounded more like a growl. Old audio clip taken out of context. But his eyes darted too fast, searching for an exit, searching for control. Sarah stood stunned, her bouquet trembling in her hands. "Thomas, what was that?" Her voice cracked, brittle as glass. He reached for her arm, but she yanked back, the first spark of doubt finally flickering in her eyes. I stepped forward, notebook in hand, my voice steady. "That wasn't a joke. That was your fiancé plotting to ruin you, to take your money, your home, even your daughter." Gasps rippled to the hall, like waves crashing against rocks. Thomas lunged toward me then, fury breaking through his mask. He grabbed my lapel, his whisper hot in my ear. "You're finished, old man." But before he could shove me, two of Sarah's cousins pulled him back, holding his arms like steel clamps. Guests circled, half in shock, half in outrage. And that was when Anna, sweet, brave Anna, stepped into the open. She held up her tablet, her small voice cutting to the chaos. "I have the pictures. I saw everything." The crowd turned to her, stunned, and Sarah's knees nearly buckled. In that moment, I saw Thomas's empire of lies collapse in real time, brick by brick, in front of everyone he thought he'd fooled. But the night wasn't over, because what I knew and what he feared most was still coming. The reception hall had turned into a courtroom, and Thomas was the man on trial. The DJ froze by his booth, the guests whispering like jurors passing notes. Sarah stood pale, bouquets slipping from her hands to the floor. And me. I felt years roll off my back as I finally stepped into the light. No longer the old man everyone thought was paranoid, but the witness with the smoking gun. Thomas thrashed against the cousins holding him, spitting out words like venom. "This is lies. He's senile. You're all watching a bitter old man try to sabotage love." His voice cracked, desperation leaking through. That's when I pulled the leather notebook from my jacket. I flipped it open, pages scrawled with dates, times, names, numbers, every little piece I tracked. "You think I can keep receipts?" I said, my voice echoing across the hall. "Every call, every text, every deal you whispered about in the dark, written down, and now recorded." I held up the recorder for everyone to see, its red light still blinking like a beating heart. Sarah's eyes brimmed with tears, fury mixing with shame. "Thomas, tell me it isn't true." Her voice was pleading, but weak, and he gave her nothing. No explanation, no apology, just silence. That silence screamed louder than anything. Then, like fate itself, the heavy oak doors at the back swung open. A man stepped in broad-shouldered, sharp-eyed. He flashed a badge. "FBI. I know that voice. We've been tracking you since Dallas." The room erupted in shock. Guests gasped, some clutching their pearls like a scene from an old movie. Thomas's body went slack. His fight drained in an instant. And me? I felt something I hadn't in years. Not triumph. Not gloating. Just the weight of justice finally landing where it belonged. But the verdict hadn't been read yet, and I wasn't finished making him pay. The badge gleamed under the chandeliers, and suddenly the whole hall shifted. What had been a wedding was now a crime scene in slow motion. Guests edged back, their whispers buzzing like hornets. Thomas tried to laugh again, but it came out as a hollow bark. "You don't have anything on me," he snapped, his voice shrill. But Connor did, the snake who'd been his partner in every whisper and every late-night call. Connor stepped forward from a corner of the room, his face pale as if the walls themselves were closing in. He raised his hands like he was surrendering to the air. "I'm done, Thomas. I'm not going down for you." The room froze. Connor's words hung heavy, like smoke nobody could breathe through. He turned to the agent, voice breaking. "It's true. The plan. The transfers. Argentina. Patricia in Dallas. It was all him. I helped, but he's the one who ran it." Sarah's bouquet lay crushed on the floor. Forgotten. Her tears weren't soft anymore. They were hard, angry, each one burning to the makeup on her cheeks. She stared at Thomas as though the man she thought she loved had been a stranger in a mask all along. Thomas jerked against the cousins holding him, veins standing out in his neck. "You coward. You think turning on me will save you?" His voice cracked into a scream, and the whole room saw him for what he really was. Not a charming groom, not a mastermind, just a desperate con with nothing left to hide behind. I stood steady, notebook still open in my hand, recorder blinking like a metronome, keeping time with his downfall. For the first time all night, I didn't need to speak. Thomas's world was collapsing without me lifting a finger. But I still had one last move to play, and it would be the one that broke him completely. The hall buzzed like a hive on fire, guests shouting, phones flashing, Sarah trembling as if the floor itself had betrayed her. The FBI agent moved closer, but I raised a hand. "Not yet," I said, surprising even myself, because justice wasn't just about handcuffs. It was about truth out loud, with no shadows left for a man like Thomas to crawl into. I stepped forward until I was only inches from him. His eyes were wild, darting around for an ally he no longer had. I pulled from my jacket a folded photograph. Sarah on her first wedding day, standing next to Carter, the man who'd conned her before. I held it high for everyone to see. 7 years ago, I said, voice carrying across the room. I let this happen. I ignored my wife's warning. I stood by while my daughter married a thief, and it cost her everything. I swore that day it would never happen again. And now here you stand, Thomas. Same lies, same greed, same poison smile. I thrust the photo against his chest, hard enough to make him flinch. But this time I fought back, and this time you lose. The crowd erupted, not with cheers, but with outrage, a wave of condemnation so strong it pinned him in place better than any rope. Sarah's cousins shoved him toward the center of the room, every eye burning holes through his facade. Even the band, silent all night, laid down their instruments like a verdict had been read. Thomas's mask shattered. He screamed at the guests, at Sarah, at me. "You're all fools. You'd be nothing without me." His voice cracked, hollow and pitiful. And in that moment, I knew the final humiliation was coming, not from me, not even from the agent. It would come from the woman he thought he owned. Sarah stood frozen for what felt like an eternity, her face a canvas of rage, heartbreak, and dawning clarity. The crowd parted around her like water around a stone, giving her space, giving her choice. She bent slowly, picked her bouquet up off the floor, and for a moment it looked like she might cradle it to her chest. Instead, with a strength that made the hall gasp, she hurled it straight into Thomas's face. The roses hit him with a thud, petals scattering across the polished floor like drops of blood. Gasps turned to cheers. Thomas staggered back, red blooming on his cheek, where the bouquet struck. Sarah's voice rang out, louder than I'd ever heard. "You think you fooled me, Thomas? You never fooled me. You blinded me. But now everyone sees you for what you are, trash." The words cut deeper than any knife. The same man who thrived on charm, who lived for admiration, was now reduced to an object of ridicule. Guests laughed, some cruelly, some in disbelief. The cousins holding him didn't even bother to restrain his arms anymore. He had nowhere left to run. He tried one last time, his voice cracking, desperate. "Sarah, baby, it was business. Just business." But she turned her back on him, her gown sweeping like a curtain falling on his act. That was the moment he broke. His body sagged, his mouth opening but no words coming out. The FBI agent moved in then, cuffs flashing under the lights. The crowd clapped, some even shouting, "Lock him up." Thomas fought weakly, curses spilling out, but it only made him look smaller, weaker. I slipped an arm around Anna's shoulders. She leaned into me, whispering, "We did it, Grandpa." And for the first time in years, I let myself believe her. But deep down I knew the final image, the closure we all needed, hadn't arrived yet. That would come after the dust settled, when family, not revenge, would have the last word. The hall emptied slowly, guests drifting out in stunned clusters, voices low and shaken. The FBI led Thomas, Ava and Connor out in cuffs, their faces pale under the flashing blue and red of squad cars outside. Cameras from cell phones caught every angle. His final walk of shame immortalized not in wedding photos, but in evidence reels. For a man who craved admiration, there was no deeper grave than humiliation in the public square. I stood by the doorway, Anna's hand tucked firmly in mine, Sarah at my other side. She hadn't let go of me since the moment Thomas was dragged away. Her mascara streaked down her cheeks, but her eyes, those eyes that once looked at me with doubt and anger, now held something else, gratitude. She whispered, barely audible of the commotion, "Dad, I should have listened. I'm sorry." I pulled her into my arms, and for a moment the years of distance between us dissolved. The smell of her hair, the trembling of her shoulders, it was like holding my little girl again. Later, we found ourselves in a quiet cafe downtown, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tastes like burnt toast. It was nothing glamorous, but was ours. Anna stirred her hot chocolate. Sarah picked at a slice of pie, and I sat there with my notebook closed at last, the leather cover cool beneath my hands. I thought of my wife, of the promise I broke years ago, and how tonight I'd finally kept it. The notebook wasn't just evidence anymore. It was a record of love, protection, and the lengths a man would go to keep his family safe. Anna looked up at me, chocolate mustache on her lip, and grinned. "So, Grandpa, when do the detective lessons start?" I laughed, a sound I hadn't made in years, deep and honest, because that was the final image. Not Thomas's downfall, but the three of us together, broken pieces stitched back into something stronger. And as the New Year's bells rang in the distance, I knew our story of betrayal had ended, but our story of family had just begun. If you like this story, please like this video. Subscribe to the channel and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the right.